day, everybody. It is Calxiyn here. If you guys enjoyed this video, you guys should subscribe, become patrons over on Patreon to support the channel, and follow us over on social media. So today we are going to be talking about romance, specifically in RWBY, specifically Renora and Bumblebee, to a certain extent. We'll talk about Crow maybe a little bit at the end, but we're mostly going to be talking about this in the context of Team RWBY and Team Juniper and all of that sort of stuff. And so here's the thing that I sort of want to start with, okay? Like, I don't want this video to get confused with a shipping video, because this is not about shipping. Shipping is something that the fans do, right? Like, you ship two characters together, like, whatever, you want them to be together, all that stuff. But when we're talking about romance and we're talking about writing romance, like, that is something that is on the part of the writers, and they're using it, like, either for plot development or character development or whatever have you, right? And so what bothers me about RWBY in particular is that I'm not sure exactly why that is, but there seems to be some, like, romance hostility by some part of the fan base to some extent, where it seems like, to a lot of people, and this is outside of RWBY too, romance does not have the same intrinsic value as writing friendships. Like, you can't really write a story without, like, you know, friendships, unless you're, like, a hermit in the woods or something like that. Like, all good stories, like, have, like, there are friends that are, like, sidekicks. And if we think about sort of what RWBY is based off of, like, fairy tales and myths and stuff like that, like, if you look at, like, any Disney movie, there are
Disney
a cast
notorious for not making romantic films.
Well, no, this is what I'm getting at, right? Like, there's always sort of, like, you know, you have a friend, you have sort of a sidekick, you know what I mean? Like, Beauty and the Beast, there's all the people in the castle, and then Aladdin, there's Abu and the carpet and Genie. Like, you have friends, is what I'm trying to say.
Listen, sometimes you have friends, sometimes they're talking animals, sometimes they're talking inanimate objects. That's just how we do.
But, you know, my point is basically that friendships are in, like, all stories, and pretty much all fairy tales. Like, there's always sort of, like, you're doing something with someone else. You have friends, okay? That's the first part. But something else is that all of these stories, most of them anyway, they all have a romantic element as well. And what bothers me about RWBY in particular is that it's great to have friends. Like, it's great to all be friends.
And they are friends.
And they are friends. And, you know, people are like, why can't they just be friends? Why does everything need to be about romance? Like, this isn't a girl anime, you know what I mean? I don't know what you call them. The
Shoujo?
Shoujo. Like, this isn't a romance shoujo anime.
I don't see a pretty boy here.
And so it's one of those things that always confuses me, because I'm like, friendships develop the story. It gives characters sort of depth and development, because you have all these people and they're all, you know, interacting, and those interactions sort of change people. If you think about the friendship between, you know, Blake and Weiss, and how much that has changed both of them, right? And you sort of think about that. But what bothers me is that people seem to discredit romance and don't realize that romance is also a tool for development and is just as important in a story. And that's not me saying, like, you have to, like, put your character with someone. They're the, like, you know, they won't develop. But it's
we
that...
need breeding pairs.
Like, you know, that doesn't need to happen. You can have a story without romance, right? But I think that it is a good tool for writers to use, especially if they do want to put their characters with someone. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just, oh, we're gonna force these two together so they have some character development, you know? If they have the chemistry and they have the relationship, like, it can be, you know, interesting, right? And so specifically, like, I guess we'll start with Renora first. I think my biggest gripe when it comes to Renora specifically is that they have known each other since they were kids, and you'd think they'd be a little further along by now than they haven't.
Listen,
you know,
they're emotionally stunted. It's...
Yeah, and so it's one of those things where we sort of think about, I think people have sort of the opposite problems. Like, some people think that Bumblebee is too rushed. I think that they've waited long. Like, I think it's an appropriate time if Blake and Yang get together by the end of this volume, right? And with Renora, it's too slow. And so those are two clearly opposite problems, right? But people don't really complain about Renora being, like, canon or together.
I wonder why.
I don't think, and so we'll talk about Bumblebee after, but I think in terms of Renora, what's interesting about their particular romance, especially in this episode, is that Pyrrha is gone, and you have this sort of situation where Jean has become the third wheel. Oh, like, Ren, I love your outfit, and Ren just sort of blows her off, and Jean just comes in like, I like your outfit, Nora. Like, he's just entirely
so pure.
oblivious
like,
and
in
pure.
his head, it was like, I'm gonna be a good team leader. You look great, Nora.
And so he doesn't
Why are you walking away from me upset?
Right. I feel like that there will come a point where
their trio's down to 2?
Yeah, but down to 2 in the reverse, I guess. And so I would like to see how Jean sort of feels about that. And I think to some extent they could incorporate, like, Jean, I don't want to say being forced with Ruby, because I don't mean that in a romantic sense, but for Jean to be like, you know, Ren and Nora, they seem kind of, I don't know. And then Ruby's like, yeah, I know what you mean. Like, usually me and my sister, like, we hang out a lot, but recently it's been like, you know what I mean? Like, it could be something that they could both bond over, whoever feels, I guess, left out, right? We'll talk about that more with Bumblebee, but I think with John in particular, he has no partner anymore. Like, Pyrrha was his partner, and I think that's gonna hit different, and that's gonna hit, like, him a lot harder. Ruby and Weiss are still together, right? And so that's sort of what I think about that. And so when it comes to Renora, I can see this being very interesting, just because of that dynamic. And you also have Elm and Vine, and I think that Elm and Vine are sort of going to be parallels to Ren and Nora, because they are very similar in personality and sort of different characteristics.
Big,
and it's like
buff, happy, big swinging hammer lady.
Yeah,
and then like smoother ninja quiet boy.
Yeah, and so I feel like that
our favorite archetype.
It'll develop interestingly, because in my head, how it's going to work is that they're parallels. And so it's sort of like, you know, Nora, I was in your spot once, but you know what you gotta do? You know what I'm saying? Like, they can give each other advice and sort of have that development like that. But what I'm also interested in is how this goes back into sort of Nora and Ren's backstories. And I think that that's another, like, sort of asset to having a romantic relationship, is like, we like to share stuff with our friends, but sometimes even like with our friends it's a little too personal, but we would share it maybe like with someone that like we're dating, or like your husband, you know what I mean? Like, there's stuff that you tell your husband that maybe you don't tell your friends and all that stuff, or your wife or whoever.
Now I'm concerned, like, what are you hiding from me?
I'm
Anyways,
just saying.
moving forward.
But yeah, I think when it comes to like the Renora stuff, like Ren and like his parents seem to have a happy, you know, normal, stable marriage. Okay, like he saw like how things could be, you know what I mean? He seemed to have like that sort of healthy upbringing.
Until they were all butchered.
And so I wonder if that's what Ren's worried about. Like, Ren can't lose any more people, and so he tries to hold Nora at a respectable distance.
Not only that, but Nora maybe has abandonment issues and is worried about Ren running away.
Yeah, I feel like in a sense,
they have similar issues.
Not that Nora's clingy, but Nora wants to cling on to Ren because she's afraid he'll disappear. Yeah. And Ren is sort of pushing her at a distance
in case he disappears or she
exactly.
disappears.
And so I feel like
they have the same issue, but they're dealing it in opposing ways.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that that's sort of interesting because you sort of have, you know, like both of Ren's parents died. Like, that's probably pretty traumatic.
Pretty bad.
Sis.
His house collapsed on his mom.
And so when you look at it like that, can you really blame Ren for not wanting to get into a relationship? Like, especially because he was a little kid when that happened. It's sort of like that was his, you know, experience with seeing two people that were happy and in love together. Like, that's kind of traumatic. When it comes to Nora, I think the abandonment thing, like, is definitely it. Because she was abandoned by her, but like her parents died or something. Like, I'm not saying they just dropped her off on the side of the road, but we don't really know what happened there. And we have heard that Nora is gonna get some like backstory or something this season, and so I feel like that backstory could be brought out more because of this romance situation, because we already know what happened to Red, and we can sort of presume to a certain extent why he feels the way he does, but we don't really know. Like, we know where Nora started off in Ren's story, but we don't know her own story. And I feel like that is what romance can be used for in this instance, to bring out these sorts of things. And, you know, we also haven't had a very healthy example of two people together and also fighting together, other than like Gira and Callie, but they aren't really huntsmen. And so that has another layer on it. But think about
really
it.
Are. When it comes to RWBY, they are the couple goals.
Raven and Tai Yang were partners, supposedly, and that didn't work. And like every other relationship, like Jacques is abusive. He's not a huntsman either, but I'm saying like specifically huntsman relationships and relationships in teams have historically not gone very well. All right, so that's our Renora segment for this video. I'll probably put a timestamp. Like, the first half is Renora, the second half is Bumblebee, and then at the end, I guess we'll talk about Crow a little bit. Here's the thing about the Bumblebee stuff is I feel like why can't they just be friends? Like, you know, sister goals, like they're all supposed to, Team RWBY's supposed to be a sister thing is a little bit like it's a veil of homophobia. Like people are trying to say that, but nobody's saying that like about Ren and Nora, you know what I'm saying? Or like even Pyrrha and Jean when that was the thing. And so I feel like that's sort of the issue. Like I feel like too, it's not necessarily people are homophobic, they just really don't want it. And like, I don't know why. I'm not here to psychoanalyze you. I'm here to tell you why there is value to having them be together story-wise. And I feel like what's really interesting is that Blake and Yang sort of have the same issues that Ren and Nora do to an extent, but almost the reversed, because think about it, okay? Like, Yang was a little girl, like, her mom left her, you know what I mean? Left her and her father. She saw what happened, like, to her father after her mother left. He was happy, he, like, remarried, and now she's dead, too.
She has bad luck.
Like, what? Like, you know what I mean? And so I feel like Yang definitely, you know, people are like, well, Yang doesn't have abandonment issues from Raven. I feel like her abandonment issues may not necessarily manifest the same way as people think that they do. And I think that they will when it comes to Blake. Yang wants to hold on to Blake.
I also would argue that they're developing their relationship is also them, is as their relationship grows together, they also grow beyond their past traumas. I think it's really important that, you know, they both together killed and defeated Adam, who caused, you know, was the cause of a lot of Yang strife with losing her arm and also her team, and also with traumatizing Blake for so many years. I think the fact that they were able to beat him together and then, you know, live to move beyond that, I think that moving on your past traumas is parallel to them growing together as a couple. Would you agree with that?
I think so, because here's the thing, right? Weiss, I don't want to say she's done her development, but she has had a nearly full story arc. Like, after she goes after Jacques and, like, slays the dragon, or whatever you want to call it, like, that is when her story is finished, when she takes back the company, to an extent. I don't want to say her story, but yeah, like, she has gone on sort of the hero's journey type circle, you know what I mean? And so Weiss has sort of gone in her maximum amount of character development, if that makes sense. Like, I'm sure she'll change a little bit, but I think that she's pretty set in stone for the moment. RWBY is still, like, everybody's still waiting for RWBY to have a mental breakdown, and I do think that we're going to see that eventually. But here's the thing about Blake and Yang, and I don't know how much of the DC comic they're going to necessarily incorporate, but you see this time where Blake is very different, and she's like nothing can hurt me, like I'm the best, and she's just has all of this sort of personality, and she's overflowing with life, like, in a strange way. And obviously Blake has changed, but I don't think that Blake's personality has necessarily entirely flourished, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like she's obviously, like, shown personality. I'm not saying that she has none. When you watch
Volume 1 and then Volume 6, you realize how much she has changed.
Yeah, exactly. And so she has changed. But I wonder if Yang could bring out the part of her that she lost because she was with Adam. And it could have been a thing of, like, oh, you were, like, extroverted when you were younger, and as you got older, you got introverted. But at the same time, I'm like, no, I think that was something, like, whatever light she had in her was squashed by Adam. And she'll likely never be the same, but at the same time, it would be interesting for Yang to sort of bring out that side of her like she was when she was a kid, if that makes sense. And, like, I don't want her to be, like, super different, but I think that she can still be, like, you know, when she had that little laugh at the end of this episode when Yang's like, wait to see, like, what she can do with her eyes, and Blake sort of, like, you know, smiled and laughed. Like, that was
out of
so
character
nice
for Volume 1 Blake. And that's when you realize how much she has grown
and so
out of her shell.
I want more of that. And it's not even necessarily a shell thing. Like, it's just, I want her to recover parts of her personality
from her
and sort of surprise us, right? In terms of Yang, I don't know if Yang's personality is going to change very much. I think that it definitely has, but at the same time it hasn't. Like, Yang is very much, like, if you look at Yang from Volume 1 and Yang to now, obviously there are differences, but she's still joking, she's still sort of carefree and all that stuff. You know, like, when she's coming out of the airplane and she's doing, like, the gun thing, and like, woohoo! Like, that's what I mean by carefree, like, in terms of, like, in, you know, in battle, she's ready to jump out of the plane and zoom or whatever they were doing.
I think her like, because in volume 2 you get that idea of like, I just want to see the world and have fun.
Yeah.
Why she wants to be a huntress. I think that has changed a lot.
Yeah.
As she's sort of grown and cared about people like
And I wonder what about it has changed. And I think it would be interesting because Yang has seen the world to some extent. Like, she's been in Vale.
Yeah.
She's went to Mistral and Mantle. She's in Atlas. Like, the last place to go was in Vacuo. And so she
Island
has
and Menagerie.
sort of achieved her dream to an extent. Like, it's not necessarily how maybe she doesn't want it anymore, but she achieved it, like the dream that she had in the past, and I think that's sort of interesting. But I think what's most interesting about this particular episode is that we get to see a side of Yang where she's flustered. And I don't think that we've seen that particular side before, because we've seen Blake be embarrassed. Like, Sun does the like whatever at the Vital Festival and she blushes and she's a bit like, Blake is embarrassed a lot, but with Yang she's always so confident to an extent.
My favorite
you know
part
what I mean?
about
And like
her
seeing
being,
her fluster, like all of that stuff, like that
so
brings
much.
out a whole new side of her character, because I think it makes us realize that even though Yang has a confident front and she's very like, you know, like she grabs Junior's dick and she's very commanding and all that stuff. I'm thinking back in volume 2, right? Like she is very like commanding. At the same time around Blake she does get flustered and she doesn't doesn't know how to act, and I think that's really adorable. And it sort of reminds me, like, what if that's like what Tai Yang is when he's in love? Like, I just want Yang to be a bit of a giant dork. In terms of like plot stuff, like the Renora stuff, really, I feel like Juniper at this point has nothing to do with the plot. Like they really just don't, and so it's more about Nora's backstory. But with Bumblebee, it's sort of like, you know, we have this volume of Faunus discrimination and stuff like that, and so it's like as they develop their relationship, what sort of, you know, scrutiny or whatever do they face in Atlas and all that stuff. And also it would be interesting to come back to the Vital Festival tournament. Remember when Pietro's like, I reviewed the footage to make your, you know, to make your stuff, and then like I can only imagine in her head Yang's just like, okay, well how much footage did you look at there?
I call this arm the Knee Buster 5000.
Exactly. And so I sort of wonder like if eventually there will be a sort of conflict, because we had this, you know, the racist guy, but Weiss took care of that. But I sort of think like, oh, you're the girl who broke that guy's leg, and Blake to be like, you don't understand the full story, okay? Like, don't make assumptions about people you don't know. Like, I would really like to see Blake come out of her shell and really stand up for Yang when it comes to stuff like that, because Yang did some shady shit on the TV, you know what I mean? And so I sort of wonder if that's ever going to be relevant again, especially in Atlas where everybody's being sort of surveilled and all of that stuff. But yeah, at least Blake has an example of a healthy relationship in her life. Like, obviously she was still manipulated by Adam, but it's like, you know, Gira and Callie like are a very strong
They're like their relationship goals in RWBY.
And something else that I was sort of thinking about, and I don't want this to be a sort of jealousy thing, and I think people misunderstood me because they don't want to like, oh, Yang is jealous over Ilya arc, and I don't necessarily want that either. But just because I'm not jealous doesn't mean I wouldn't be concerned, right? Does that make sense? If my boyfriend was like referencing like a girl like from his past or something,
girlfriend.
you know what I mean? Like, it's not that I would be like, oh, I'm jealous, I'm not talking to you, we're gonna get into a fight. Like, I don't want that for Yang and Blake. But you know, I'm sort of thinking like, if I were Yang, I would at least want to ask about it. You know what I mean? And that could be more of an insecurity, not a jealousy. Now we'll use the rest of the video just to talk about Crow very briefly, because people are like, wow, they're making Crow gay. That's so forced. He's only shown interest in women. And I was just like, I don't know. He just, why are you pointing at me for, Hunter?
I'm just like, he's not, it's like, you can be, so there's this thing that's kind of like, you can like boys and girls. We have an example here.
Oh boy, we have a specimen.
We have a specimen.
No, but here's what I'm saying, right? Like, yes, Crow like wanted to see up that girl's skirt or something, the waitress, like, or something, like that one time, okay? But it's sort of one of those things where I'm like, I don't know where people got the implication that Crow is straight, because he is not. I don't want to say, like, I don't want to, like, go back to stereotypes, but he's not, like, this bro, like, oh, yeah, I fuck all these bitches type guy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to Crow in particular, like, it's kind of like nearing on, we can almost like presume that maybe he had some kind of relationship with Summer. Not exactly. Like it hasn't really been said.
It has not been said.
I know
at
it hasn't
all.
been said. That's why I'm saying that we
Okay.
can sort of imagine maybe, because like realistically, right? Your sister has a boyfriend, you're all teenagers, you're all horny, and you're all sharing the same room. Like, realistically, what's that gonna happen? You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying they had to have some deep romance, but if you want to double date with your sister and your best friend, you go with Summer, you know what I'm saying? So it's sort of like a Team Juniper situation.
What I think's interesting about Crow and the new guy is that Crow has always historically had a lot of issues with
Well, that's
commitment.
what I was gonna get at.
Yes,
Don't you want me
okay.
to finish
Okay,
first?
well,
it's
just,
sort of
you're
like,
taking a minute.
here's the thing, okay? Like, whether Crow and Summer were actually together or not, like, we can't necessarily say. But what I will say is that it's a little traumatic, causing the death, maybe, if Crow did cause Summer's death, like a lot of people think, of the person that you love. Oopsies. Or just a person. Just
Or
any old person, but at the
Not
same
even
time,
romantically,
you
they
know,
probably
your
still
friend,
loved each other.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where it's just like, regardless, I think that Crow's issues sort of stem from that. And so I think that what a romance would do for Crow in particular, whether it's with Clover or Ironwood or whoever, is that Crow sort of has this, I guess it's this fear of being around other people, or he doesn't want to be around other people so he doesn't hurt them. And maybe we'll get into like Crow getting a bit more, I don't want to say backstory, but like I loved someone once
Development.
and she died. Like, you know what I mean?
And he's concerned that his bad luck semblance is going to kill people, but then he meets this guy who neutralizes his semblance. So you wonder, like, finally, like, I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's character development. Like, he's like, oh, I can finally not be so jaded and alone, potentially.
And I think that it kind of goes back, again, to the Summer stuff. Like, we don't know, right? Like, we sort of have these fanon theories, and the writers have hinted at, like, certain things for a while, but we don't exactly know. But if we run with the assumption that something happened to Summer because of Crow, whether they were in a romantic relationship or not, like, we should find out this volume based on that development. And we can find out anyway, even if Clover and Crow are just friends. Like, to be honest, Crow seems too old for Clover. It makes sense to me for Crow to become a part of the Aesops and to be friends with Clover, but actually go into something with Ironwood. And I know that sounds so weird, but that's sort of how I see it, and it would sort of come around full circle, right? Because it would be able to be friends with Clover, and it's like, I can finally, like, do some good for the world, like, now that I can fight and, like, save people, or whatever Crow wants to do. You know what I mean? Like, we can be partners. High five, sis. You know what I'm saying? And it would make sense because everyone in the Aesops has sort of an opposite.
Yes.
If that makes sense. Like, hair goes super fast. Marrow can stop time. Vine's on the hands. Vine's on the legs. Clover has good luck, and Crow has bad luck. Like,
Elm
it's,
on the legs.
you know, it's never, what?
You said a Vine on the arms, Vine on the legs.
Yeah, Vine on the arms. Like Vine has the arms.
I thought you were saying
No,
Vine as in
Vines
his name. Okay.
have the arms,
Yes.
and Elm has the vine legs,
Yes.
like the plant legs, right? And so I think that Crow joining the Aesops makes a lot of sense because he is now, like, he also balances it out.
That would really change his character going on from the guy who said, like, if I was one of your men, I would shoot myself.
And so that's what I'm saying. Like, that is spicy. And so that is the reason why I actually think that Crow and Ironwood would be better here. Just because then it's not weird. Because Ironwood and Crow are the same age, right? Whereas, you know, Clover and... I don't know.
Clover feels older to me.
To me, it just seems weird. I don't know why. Like, it's just...
I mean, like, a decade age difference in partners, like, yuck, who would want that?
Anyway,
it's creepy.
like, with Winter, Winter strikes me as around Clover's age as well, but it just, I don't know, there's just something about it that I don't like.
Something about, like, the lines in his face.
Yeah,
makes him look
exactly!
older. He's RWBY
I don't know
old.
if I like that.
He's
like,
older, I think.
I don't know, like, there's something about them together that I'm just like, I think that Ironwood and Crow would work a lot better. Because then you do have, like, if you were one of my men, like, you have this sort of, you know, placement from the very beginning of the series and their relationships from the very start. And that could have grown into, like, I want to join your men, actually. And then he's just like, you know, like...
I know you feel that way, but I think personally it makes more sense with Clove.
I know.
Just because they're more foils.
It makes narrative sense, I guess. And like,
and that's sort of the gist of
I just
this
don't
video.
like him. Narratively,
Lucky bird?
wouldn't
I don't know.
also be interesting for the
That's
you were
some
one of
truth
my
to
men
that, yeah.
situation to come full circle, and for Ironwood to be like, it's good to have you here, Crow, because they were so at odds before. Like, it's enemies to lovers, sort of. Like, I like enemies to love. Maybe that's why. Because here's the thing: narratively, Ironwood and Crow still has merit. That's what I'm saying. This isn't shipping Hunter. I'm just saying that I don't like Clover. I don't know. I don't like his face. I don't want him with Crow for some reason.
I don't like his face. I don't
like him. Maybe, you know what we need? We need to see the Aesops out of their uniforms. Because I think that's
relaxing.
You know what I mean? Because Crow sort of, like, everybody has their outfits, but the Aesops are just in uniform. I think that's what we need here, sis. But when it comes to Ironwood, the sort of reasoning I have is that Crow pushes people away because he doesn't want to hurt them, right? Because he's afraid of, like, the bad luck and what will happen to the people around him that he loves. When it comes to Ironwood, I took a look at Ironwood's body for no weird reason, just for research purposes, okay? And I took a look, and he is, like, full android.
Kaylin, what are you doing in there? Research! I'm doing research!
Anyway, so Ironwood, like, his metal thing is, like, up to the back of his neck. And, like, his entire leg is also robot. And so you sort of wonder, and I sort of had this theory on Twitter. I'm like, what if Ironwood is basically a penny, but has no soul? Because then you're the Tin Man that has no heart, right? And so that's what I was sort of thinking about, is that Penny, you know, has a soul, and you can still make an AI. Like, this could be a Detroit Become Human situation, and that's what Ironwood is. And so it's sort of, I don't know, isn't it just fitting to you that Crow has a lot of love for people but pushes them away, whereas Ironwood is a robot that maybe, like, not that Ironwood can't love, but he's a robot who thinks he has no heart, he has no soul. I don't know. Like, I think there's something there, but I can't necessarily put it into words.
Can't connect those lines.
But I think it would be interesting because, like, I think Crow's performance this volume so far has been filled with a lot more emotional depth. Yeah. All right, and I don't know why that is. Like, I wonder if there was any significant change about the casting of that. But I think that, you know, Jason plays Crow as an actual human being. Like, you can be a grovelly, like, like, guy all the time. You know what I mean? But people still have feelings. People still have feelings, and I think he's able to, you know, give Crow feelings without getting rid of, like, the gruff part of him as well. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's able to balance it a lot better than I think Vic did. Like, no offense. I don't want to get this into a voice acting argument, right? But I do think that it's true. I think Crow has a lot more emotional depth and range this volume because of how Jason is performing as him. And I don't think that is just because of the lines. I think that is just because it's different. Like, he's just a different voice actor. And so I sort of wonder when it comes to that as well, like, if... I don't know how to explain it. If the voice acting will sort of help give life to Crow being in some sort of relationship or some sort of friendship, because it gives Crow sort of the emotional depth that he's needed. Like, maybe that's why they decided to sort of hold off. Like, I don't want to say that's why they decided, but you think that the perfect time to talk about summer would have been last volume, right? Like, to some extent, but no, they didn't. But now it seems like they're gonna get into something.
But they certainly introduced summer at the end of the volume.
And so it's sort of one of those things where it's like, if they, you know, whether it was intentional or not, like, having it done now when Crow is sort of having more emotion in his voice and not drinking as much, like, there's all these sort of things going on. Like, I find that very interesting for his character stuff. So, yeah.
Romance has a point. It's not just shipping.
Thank you. That's it. So, yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed this, and we will see you later. Bye.
Thank you to all the patrons over on Patreon who support our channel. Their names will be showcased now.